Esports is a form of competition where professional players compete either individually or as teams in organized tournaments across various game titles. From the matches played in organizations in these tournaments, esports in its current form creates narratives based on these external factors. Stories like Huanfeng's rise from poverty to fame, long-standing rivalries between players like Faker and Deft, or how a game marks the end of a storied player to never win like Khan are the types of stories esports focuses on. The media of esports and the casting desk focus on these narratives that are being built from the players' stories as each match happens. Treating them as idols, fans prefer to see the players on the screen and not the gameplay that esports is about. While this approach is certainly not bad for creating a narrative in esports, this approach fails to consider League's often overlooked narrative layer, the game design. Particularly champion mechanics and game progression, these design elements enable players to express identity, create tension, and tell stories within each match. League of Legends is made in such a way for the game to act as a competitive environment for players to be able to act out the story of League and the stories of each champion because of player-champion combinations in the match. Through elements such as the gold graph and constant story elements like objectives and minion waves, we are then able to see how players take advantage of not only the story of their champion, but the world of League of Legends. To explain the narrative elements of League of Legends, I'm first going to talk about how a champion changes the narrative of a game, but how the champion also highlights the player and the type of game they want to bring. Second, I'm going to talk about how a champion can change a team and how the narrative of the gameplay changes based on the type of champions present within a team composition. From these two examples, I hope to not only give a high-level overview of League's design, but to open the door to expose the designs of other esports titles as well. Before we dive deep into these concepts, let's provide some much-needed background on what League of Legends is. League of Legends is a MOBA where two teams of 5 players compete to destroy each other's main base called the Nexus. At the start of each match, both teams enter a champion select phase where each player picks a unique character called a champion from the current 170 options, with each champion having special abilities and a specific play style. The game is played on the map called the Summoner's Rift with 3 main lanes: top lane, middle lane, bot lane, and a jungle area in between. Each player takes on a specific role. In top lane, usually tanks or bruisers are played here. In middle lane, often mages or assassins. Bottom lane, 2 players go here, a damage dealer called a marksman, and a support who helps protect or set up plays. And the jungler, this player moves around the map, helping all the lanes and fighting special monsters for team advantages. To win, teams must work together to kill enemy players, destroy towers, and take powerful objectives like Dragon and Baron that give team-wide buffs to eventually become strong enough to prevent the enemy players from defending their nexus. If you take into consideration the average length of a League of Legends match, the amount of game time is going to be around 30 minutes, concluding with either a red or blue side winning at the end. This provides at least 30 minutes of story for both the champions and the players to play out their story of their respective champion to affect the plot elements of a match through items, levels, and objectives. It is then from the hands of these players acting through the champions that creates the story of a League match. Let's take a look at an example of how a player and champion combination can intertwine to shape the fantasy of what a player wants to bring to a match, ultimately affecting the narrative of a game.
But they also
Appa wrote in all chat, don't want to win Razork?
The overall team performance has been so much cleaner.
Eric APA Stearns is a North American mid laner who has recently taken the LTA by storm. APA has gained a reputation as an annoying player to face. He types in all chat and tries to get into the heads of players by not only outplaying them, but by also putting salt into the wound. APA has gained a couple of nicknames because of this behavior, some of them being Yappa and Yapton America. How he mirrors this personality is with the champion he is most recognizable by, Ziggs. Ziggs is a long-range artillery mage that provides damage from a distance. While the champion's not played by the general player base, when the champ does show up, he adds an annoying factor to the rift. Ziggs is chosen by players who play him consistently, leveraging the champion's niche status to exploit the enemy's unfamiliarity. Ziggs throws AoE bombs that can splash on multiple people and can destroy towers once they fall below 25% HP, rank 1, but this W is out to charge. Ziggs brings the fantasy of his abilities being able to land on short range and a mobile champion to be able to prevent them from contributing to the plot of a match. To add even more to the annoying factors Ziggs already has, he also makes laughing sounds as he throws his abilities at enemies, giving an audio indicator that you know your impending doom is coming. Ziggs' story as a champion is one that ramps up as he gets items. With his AoE damage getting stronger, abilities being able to clear waves, and cooldowns being absurdly low, Ziggs becomes a champion who has a comedic amount of poke at his disposal and has the ability to affect the plot elements of League by instantly bursting down one opponent before a fight. We can see this idea reflected in the gold graph. This gold graph came from a recent match between Team Liquid and 100 Thieves. If we compare the gold graphs of Ziggs and the overall gold graph, Ziggs' gold matches the overall graph the closest out of everyone on his team. This not only shows us that Ziggs is the strongest member on the team, but the most influential pick in the story that is currently played out. If we take a closer look, we can further reinforce this point by analyzing the growth rate of the overall gold compared to Ziggs' gold growth. With the plot element at around 21 minutes being reflected in both gold graphs, showcasing Ziggs' ability to change the game and rapidly increase the lead TL already had. League of Legends' gold graph is not only insightful to the team that is the victor at the end of a match, but also the story of each champion that plays out at a specific plot point during the game, with the growth gold being affected by the champion's ability to collect gold and other resources. Although this growth can be further explained through the player that is playing the champion. If we consider the rates a player can have on a plot element of League, the rate a player is able to affect the plot follows between the baseline amount of change a champion is able to achieve and the perfect play a champion theoretically can achieve. These derivatives are not only insightful to player skill, but how the combination of a player with a champion can affect a plot point in a game. With the players being close to the perfect play having a major impact on a plot point, giving us insight on how well a player is able to take advantage of a champion, but also what a champion is able to theoretically achieve. This champion combination of Ziggs with APA is not only insightful to the type of player APA wants to be, but also the type of game he is bringing to the Rift through Ziggs. The LTA takes this idea by calling APA a trash talker from previous players who were more humble and reserved. Although, the reality is that the design of one of League's champions is piloted by a player that matches the type of fantasy the two want to bring to the game, showcasing a champion that is not common, making the player and champion seem new to the LTA. Now that we understand how a champion and player combination takes advantage of the design of League, let's expand this idea and look at how a champion pick can affect a team. The time is October 20th, 2017, and League's most watched tournament, Worlds, is playing its semi-final match, Misfits vs SK Telecom T1. The meta at the time was very slow-paced, and average games would range around 35 minutes to an hour. This is due to item damage being low, champion health being high, and Ardent Censer being the best item in the game. However, if you consider the type of champions that fundamentally counter enchanters, a player's first conclusion would most likely be a hook champion. Blitzcrank is a relatively simple champion, with his most recognizable ability, Rocket Grab, allowing him to grab a champion from across a sizable distance. This not only allows his team to burst the grabbed victim, but it makes him a consistent threat no matter how behind he is. This key ability is plot defining. If a champion is dead, they cannot use their items they have purchased no matter how good the item is. Champions have fundamental weaknesses that can be exploited in the story of League. Lee Ignar Dongkyun understood this concept and took it to his advantage. Ignar was known as a player that could not play enchanters, but made a name for himself by playing engaged champions in the EU LCS. He was the type of player who always wanted to be an X-factor in the story of League. Blitzcrank allowed Ignar to transform the narrative of a League story at the time from being focused on the completion of items like Ardent Censer to instead being focused on Blitzcrank's ability to land hooks in key moments. While we have seen the ways in which champion-player combination can influence the plot, even with Ignar's playstyle, we still must consider, what about Ardent Censer? Even though Ignar can affect the plot early, Misfits are still fighting the clock as champions are scaling and have carries of their own. Even with champions having a fundamental weakness, if we ignore the conditions of League's balance, the gold graph could theoretically look like this, where indeed Blitz is able to affect the plot but not able to turn the game into a win. This is where Numbar, Maxlore, Serafian, and Tristan, Power of Evil, Sharage come in. While Ignar is the type of player who wants to affect the plot of League's story early, Maxlore and Power of Evil understand that Ardent Censer must be built somewhere. Playing champions like Kamra and Ivern, these two players would affect the plot through a more supportive style, maintaining the story that Ignar wanted to bring while also providing a unique way to play League due to this. We can see this idea being reflected in the gold graph, with T1's bot laner and top laner falling heavily behind Misfits' carries, and with the overall game time being much quicker than what was seen at the time. Blitzcrank's plot contribution is not seen through his gold graph, but through the gold of others around him, showing not only the influence of a team to accomplish a goal, but taking advantage of fundamental champion design in a meta that says otherwise. One of the details of League's gold graph I hid for simplification was that the conditions that affect the gold graph are much more complicated than just one champion. When you're on a team of 5, many different choices have to be made that lead up to a plot element that happens in the story. Considering the growth of a plot element is much more complex than first mentioned. With every champion fighting to turn the plot in their favor, the growth is not only affected by champions in the match, but how well each player is playing out their individual story. Without the combination of more supportive champions like Ivern and Karma, Blitz never would have worked. The modulation of champions being picked and players willing to accept playing a different style of League allows players to shine and create team compositions that highlight the player's individuality, allowing for a new story to be created through each of the champions, creating one of the best World Series to be played out by a European team that recently got promoted into the EU LCS versus the defending world champions. Even with a little bit of complexity added, there are still many factors that contribute to the gold graph playing out the way it does. Riot's balancing, wave manipulation, and objective strength are just small amounts of things that contribute to this story. Although, for the sake of this video and driving home the point that League's design contributes to the narrative being marketed, this is a great way to understand this concept and leave room for more analysis. It should also be mentioned that League is not alone in this design either. Games like Super Smash Bros. Melee and Valorant have similar designs as League that contribute to the narrative building. With Melee having a more grassroots community and more rigid design unlike Riot's bi-weekly balancing, Melee builds its design through repetition and refinement of each character's matchup and how the story plays between two fighters. When you take the time to understand the design of a game and how a player takes advantage of it, you begin to understand the narrative that is truly happening through the hands of these players.